Night falls over the dark waters of the Persian Gulf. Dozens of massive oil tankers move slowly across the sea like floating cities, each carrying millions of barrels of crude oil that power the modern world. Above them, surveillance drones circle silently. On nearby coastlines, naval radars scan the horizon. Warships sit on standby. Missile systems wait quietly in fortified positions. Because this narrow stretch of water is not just another shipping lane. It is one of the most important arteries of the global economy. Every day, nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through a few strategic choke points scattered across the planet. These routes connect oil-producing regions to the industrial economies that depend on them. And whoever controls these routes holds an extraordinary amount of power. Not necessarily through armies or political speeches, but through geography, through naval dominance, through quiet influence over the flow of energy that keeps the modern world alive. The question is simple, yet unsettling. What would happen if one country gained control over the world's most important oil routes? Who really protects them today? And how fragile is the system that keeps the global energy supply moving? To understand this, we have to step back and look at how the modern world became so dependent on oil. For more than a century, oil has been the bloodline of industrial civilization. Cars, airplanes, cargo ships, factories, power plants, and military machines all rely on it. Even in an age of renewable energy, oil still fuels global transportation and military power. But oil itself is only part of the story, because producing oil means nothing if it cannot reach the countries that need it. That's where maritime trade routes come in. Across the oceans of the world, giant tankers move crude oil between continents. These ships follow specific routes shaped by geography, politics, and security. And along these routes lie a handful of strategic choke points, narrow passages of water where global oil supply becomes dangerously concentrated. If any of them were blocked, even briefly, the consequences could ripple across the global economy. Gas prices could spike, stock markets could fall, entire industries could face shortages. One of the most critical of these choke points lies between Iran and Oman, the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, this waterway is only about 33 kilometers wide. Yet every day, roughly 20% of the world's oil flows through it. Tankers carrying oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar must pass through this corridor to reach global markets. This makes the Strait of Hormuz one of the most strategically sensitive places on Earth. But Hormuz is not the only choke point. Thousands of kilometers away lies another narrow passage with enormous geopolitical significance, the Strait of Malacca. Stretching between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, this route connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. For many Asian economies, including China, Japan, and South Korea, Malacca is the main gateway for imported oil from the Middle East. Every year, tens of thousands of ships pass through this channel. But the strait is narrow. In some sections, it's less than 3 kilometers wide, which means a single accident, blockade, or military confrontation could disrupt a massive portion of global trade. Then there's the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Located between Yemen and Djibouti, it connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and the wider Indian Ocean. Oil tankers traveling to Europe via the Suez Canal must pass through here. The region has become increasingly unstable in recent years due to conflicts in Yemen and piracy in nearby waters. And if Bab el-Mandeb were closed, ships would be forced to reroute thousands of kilometers around Africa, raising costs, delaying shipments, and potentially triggering energy crises in Europe and beyond. When you map these choke points together, a pattern begins to emerge. Global oil supply doesn't move freely across the oceans. Instead, it flows through a handful of narrow bottlenecks, like blood through arteries. Which raises a critical geopolitical question. Who ensures these routes stay open? The answer, for decades, has largely been one country, the United States. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy has played a central role in securing global maritime trade routes. With powerful fleets deployed across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, the United States developed what many analysts call a system of global maritime security. Aircraft carriers patrol strategic waters, destroyers escort commercial vessels, surveillance networks track threats ranging from pirates to hostile states. In the Persian Gulf, the U.S. Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, monitors activity around the Strait of Hormuz. In the Pacific, the 7th Fleet oversees shipping lanes connected to East Asia,
And across the globe, American naval forces regularly conduct operations designed to guarantee what is known as freedom of navigation. This system doesn't just benefit the United States, it supports the entire global economy. Countries across Europe and Asia rely on these protected shipping routes to receive the energy they need. But the system also creates a unique kind of geopolitical influence, because protecting the world's oil routes means the United States effectively sits at the center of the global energy transportation network, not as an owner, but as its primary guardian. This reality has shaped global geopolitics for decades, yet in recent years, that balance has begun to shift. New powers are rising, and some countries are quietly building strategies to reduce their vulnerability to these choke points. China, for example, imports more oil than any other country in the world. Much of that oil travels from the Middle East through the Strait of Malacca. Chinese strategists even have a term for this vulnerability, the Malacca dilemma. Because in a crisis, adversaries could potentially block this route and disrupt China's energy supply. To counter this risk, Beijing has been investing heavily in alternative routes, pipelines from Central Asia, ports across the Indian Ocean, and massive infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. At the same time, China has been expanding its naval capabilities, launching new destroyers, aircraft carriers, and overseas logistics bases designed to protect its growing maritime interests. Meanwhile, other countries are also adapting. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have built pipelines that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Russia has increased oil shipments through the Arctic routes, and Europe is trying to diversify energy imports to reduce dependency on vulnerable pathways. These changes suggest that the geopolitics of oil routes is entering a new era, one where control is not defined by a single power, but by competition among several. History offers powerful examples of how dangerous these choke points can become during times of crisis. In 1956, the Suez Crisis erupted when Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. Within weeks, military conflict disrupted one of the world's most important shipping routes. Global trade was thrown into chaos, and energy markets reacted immediately. Decades later, during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the Persian Gulf became the center of what was known as the Tanker War. Both sides targeted oil tankers traveling through the region. Mines were planted in shipping lanes, missiles struck commercial vessels, insurance costs for shipping skyrocketed, and the threat to global energy supply became dangerously real. These incidents revealed something crucial. Oil routes are not just economic lifelines, they are geopolitical pressure points, places where conflict, even on a small scale, can send shockwaves across the entire planet. And today, those risks still exist. Tensions in the Persian Gulf remain high. Rival naval forces operate in increasingly crowded waters. Piracy, regional conflict, and great power competition all add new layers of uncertainty. Yet the world continues to rely on the same narrow passages that have shaped geopolitics for generations. Every day, thousands of ships move through these corridors. Most of the time, nothing happens. The tankers pass, the oil flows, the world keeps moving. But beneath that routine lies a fragile balance of power, a system held together by diplomacy, military presence, and mutual economic dependence. Because if even one of these routes were suddenly closed, the consequences would reach far beyond the ocean. Fuel prices could surge worldwide, supply chains could break down, political tensions could escalate between major powers, all triggered by events in a stretch of water only a few kilometers wide. And that's the strange reality of modern geopolitics. Sometimes the fate of the global economy does not depend on vast continents or massive armies. Sometimes it depends on a narrow strip of ocean, a passage between two coastlines, a route where the ships never stop moving, and where the balance of power quietly decides who keeps the world running.